While you've all been in quarantine lockdown, we've been having friends over for dinner parties. Don't tell the authorities. Meanwhile, electrons have been running out to the shed, and clouds of dust have been coming out of it. But is anything useful being produced? Let's go inside and find out. We wanted some standing lamps, so the house styler decided that that should be a deep, rich wooden colour. So I brought some karri decking and then I dressed it and used that. I'll talk more about karri in another video. After I dressed it, I used this 2-flute miter lock bit to cut a profile on the edges of the timber so that they would create a self-supporting right angle interlocking joint between each other so that I could create essentially a square tube for the stand. I dressed decking timber, so it's not perfectly straight, but karri is naturally quite straight, so it came down quite well. And so I dressed that, put in the joints, profile, and then glued it and clamped it together. And of course, you can never have too many clamps. I wanted the bases to use up a minimal footprint. And karri is very heavy, so I used that to my advantage because the 18mm thick posts have quite a lot of mass, which helps to keep it anchored to the ground. And then I just created a base, as you'll see, using half-lap joints. And I wanted to make sure that those half-lap joints were quite tight, so I tried my best to cut all of those accurately, and then to join all those half-lap joints very carefully. So initially I cut the bulk of it out with a chainsaw and a chisel, a bandsaw and a chisel, and then I crept up on the lines, and then finally actually I sanded them down to the precise size, which was very slow, but it did result in me getting very nice tight joints. karri is very strong and very hard, which also means it's kind of brittle, is the way I describe it. So it's unforgiving. It doesn't compress, in other words. And so you can see here I've managed to make it just a bit too tight and break this piece. So I had to remove that, and I had to recreate that from scratch all over again, which is a bit more difficult than it sounds, because I had the machines all set up to cut specific angles. So I had to dress some more wood and round over the edges with the router and then cut them all out exactly, but we got there. On these lamps, these bases are screwed into the poles, and that's the only fittings in the whole thing, except I have also, you'll see in the next part, screwed some caps to the top. So those are the only fittings in the whole thing. It's all held together with glue, basically. But it's very strong and very heavy, and or very heavy for lamps anyway. The 4 cross supports of these bases are enough to hold it up, and then I'm just inserting some small blocks in between the gaps, just for aesthetic reasons. Just visually it made the base appear more solid, but in fact the wood's so strong that they're just there for cosmetic reasons. And that worked out really well. I did have to make sure that I got everything lined up so it would end up being nice and flat, so I didn't have to come back and try and plane those bases flat, because I don't have a good planer, and I don't have a good workbench. As you can see, it's wobbling around, so I don't know how I would have been able to plane them flat. So I just had to be very careful to make sure that everything was very flat when it got together, and that when it stood up, everything was going to be nice and flat and level and stable. This video is getting a little bit long, so I'll wrap things up here, and this will be part 1, and join me for part 2. It'll be a separate video where we'll finish these up, and then we'll wire them up, and you can see them in action. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.